party down, location mysterious. Wanna rock this con like my man James Tiberius. Jesse and Marina, they're mad clever like the Negus. Gonna guide you through the scenes, beam from London to Las Vegas. Where to go, how to dress, when to sleep, who to see. Celebs not to miss, Sardis Wong and SMG. Star Trek into awesome, build some memories at last. Set the proper course, the Shore Leave Podcast. Boom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 52nd episode of Shore Leave, your Star Trek Convention Community Podcast. I am Marina Kravchuk, and with me, as always, is my wonderful co-host, Jesse Akendo. Jesse, how are you doing today?
Hey, Marina, doing well. It's a beautiful Saturday today, isn't it?
Well, for Saturday, it certainly is, but thankfully it is spring. The convention season appears to be up and away. So many wonderful events happening. And for this particular episode, we are going to be talking about one of these events, which recently happened, as of this recording about a week ago. And that is the WonderCon Anaheim, which is a part of the Comic-Con International family of conventions. So it's the same company that puts on the biggest Comic-Con of all, which is San Diego Comic-Con. They're the ones responsible for WonderCon Anaheim as well. It's a mid-sized Comic-Con, and by that I mean we're talking about somewhere in the vicinity of 70,000 people, so it's not as truly monsters like San Diego and New York or Denver or Philadelphia, say. It's been around for over 30 years under different names, and I checked it out just to kind of familiarize myself, because I have to admit I've never actually been to any of the California events before. Very detailed website, looks like certainly a fascinating convention to add to a convention roster if our listeners are out there on the lookout for interesting events to attend. Shore Leave did cover WonderCon last year. Heather and Jeff recorded a wonderful episode with Marty and William. So that's actually the reason why we named this episode Return to WonderCon, because we're going to be talking about it again. Jesse, would you like to introduce the guest?
Yeah. On the line, we have Aly Martinez, fellow Trek cosplayer, fellow convention goer, and a part of the Tricorder Transmissions family. Aly, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks, you guys, for having me on. I'm really excited to talk about the experiences that I had at WonderCon this year.
Yeah, it's funny because like Marina and I went to Destination Star Trek in Europe, but we can't make it to California.
I know. Isn't that weird? I keep thinking like how relative it is. Sometimes there's an event happening literally in the neighboring state, and I'm like, wow, it's going to be a 4-hour drive, and it's going to be this. And then, the closest to the Pacific I've ever been is Vegas, which is kind of a ridiculous thing to say. I mean, Vegas in the middle of the desert, and that's the closest I've ever been to the Pacific.
Someday we'll get there. Someday. I
know. Well, Aly, since even though you're part of the Tricorder Tribe, but that's your very first time on Shore Leave, I wanted you to just generally talk about yourself as a fan of Star Trek, specifically about your convention-going experience. What was your first convention? So go ahead.
Sure. Well, most of you guys probably know me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram as the 23-year-old Trekkie. And I chose that name so no one else would be able to have the same name as I would on social media. So I think it's easy to remember, and I change it every year as I get older.
That's very smart, actually. It's great. That was one of my questions. I'm like, are you going to stay 23 forever?
I wish.
We all wish.
Yeah, it's a grand event. But I have been watching Star Trek, goodness, as long as I can remember. I honestly feel like really my childhood is made up of like mostly Star Trek, watching reruns and all that stuff. My honest earliest memory would be probably watching Broken Bow, the Enterprise pilot, with my parents. That's like my first solid Star Trek memory, because my parents were really excited that Enterprise was premiering, and they're like, okay, let's all sit down and watch it together. And then throughout my childhood and even like into adulthood, I would always sit down and watch Star Trek with my parents. And now they're from Wisconsin and I'm in California, but we still talk on the phone every week about the new Discovery episode. So it's kind of a legacy. So the first convention I think I ever attended was Wizard World Chicago. And that was way back in 2014. It was the year that I graduated high school. And I saw something, I think, about it on Facebook, and that kind of prompted me to buy a ticket. And a few of my friends were saying, this is something you'd really like doing. We saw it, you should go. So I had no idea what it meant to go to a convention, or really like everything that was involved in that. But I had a Next Generation jumpsuit at the time. So I was like, what the heck? I'll just wear it. And I was kind of nervous. I was like, I'm going to be the only one dressed up at this thing. Like, everyone's going to think I'm so weird. Because that's high school me with all of my worries about fitting in. And so I went to the convention, and obviously I was not the only one dressed up. And it was the most insane experience of my life. And it just kind of like threw me into this convention world. And ever since then, I've just been like craving more and more and more.
This is fascinating. I find it interesting how differently people get into the whole convention thing. Like sometimes it's like all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, that one actor, that one guest is appearing. And that's the reason I'm finally going to take the plunge and go to a convention. And sometimes people just generally like, well, why don't I go to a convention regardless of what it is? Is it the Comic-Con? Is it a genre-specific convention, a franchise-specific convention, etc.? So that is fascinating to know. So how many conventions do you have an idea how many you've been to? Like, do you go regularly?
After the first one that I went to, I actually kind of took a hiatus. My husband's in the military, so we were moving, and I was in college, and there didn't feel like much wiggle room to be able to fit all that in. But other than the first one, I've been to WonderCon twice. This is my second year, so I was there last year as well. And I have kind of wandered around outside the San Diego Comic-Con, but I've never actually gotten chosen to get tickets, which is kind of a bummer since I'm here in San Diego, right?
Yeah.
I've been to the LA Comic-Con. Star Trek Las Vegas, I went last year for my first time. I've been to a few smaller, like San Diego Comic Fest, which is a little bit more of an intimate convention. But other than that, that's about it.
Oh, that's still enough experience. If people actually ask you what it's like to go to a convention, you can certainly give them a pretty good answer, I'm sure. So how did
they
you?
all have their own life, they're all just slightly different. So
yeah, they all have like their own flavor.
Yeah. So Marina, before we get going with Aly on WonderCon, let me just do some housekeeping. Would that be okay?
Absolutely, yes, because then we're going to just really get into the details. Go ahead.
Perfect. So, hey, everyone, just so you know, Shore Leave is part of the Tricorder Transmissions Network. If you enjoy what we do here or on any of our other of our shows, we welcome you to join our Patreon, which is patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. You can also get there by visiting our webpage, which is www.thetricordertransmissions.com, and click on the Patreon link. Becoming a patron will always give you access to unedited and early release episodes, often with bonus material. And if you're lucky, Marina and I saying crazy stuff.
We try.
We do. You also get invited to our monthly chat, where we talk all things Star Trek with some of the Tricorder Transmissions co-hosts. So
yeah, and sometimes play very, very fun games. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, check it out. And we now have varying tiers. So just check us out, join us, and welcome and become part of the family. And we just thank you for your support. All right, Marina, back to you.
Thank you. So let's dig into the WonderCon. How did you find out about this particular convention specifically? I mean, just generally, did you look out like, okay, what other conventions out there in California? And what made you decide to go? It was just a general kind of like, okay, great, another convention, or was it because of something else?
Okay, so I actually found out about WonderCon as soon as I moved to San Diego. I obviously knew about Comic-Con International in San Diego, so I was on the internet and looking up on the Comic-Con International website because I was interested in getting tickets for it as soon as I got here. And a little like sidebar popped up with kind of the WonderCon information, and I had no idea that it even existed. Now, I mean, this is my second year attending WonderCon, and it's just been amazing. And part of conventions for me is not just all the stuff that they do, all of the programming, but it's also like meeting people, like meeting new Trekkies. Or I don't just like Star Trek. I like other things too. So meeting people that kind of enjoy the same thing that you do, being able to interact with those people, not just over social media, but sometimes you actually meet people face to face that you've been talking to. Like, that's an insane experience. And the whole other part of that, though, is the programming and the vendors. So, for example, like panels offer a unique look at like experiences, like set decisions, casting, all that crazy stuff. And it's also hard when you go to the vendor hall not to buy everything that you see there. That's like the one thing that I have the hardest part. And so for most conventions, I try to get as much of like a look at them as possible. So for me, it takes me a while to get through all that stuff because there's a lot of programming and there's a lot of vendors and there's a lot of things I want to see and there's a lot of people there. So I try to either get at least a Saturday and Sunday, if not a full weekend pass. So for WonderCon, I did get the weekend pass. So I was there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And it felt kind of like the perfect amount of time. It's weird because when some people think about it, looking in from the outside, they're like, man, that's 3 days. Like, that's a long time. Do you really need that much time?
And
but
most definitely do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's happened so fast. It's literally just like boom, 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 boom. And sometimes you can get caught up in all of it where you're just like, I have the schedule I need to be on. So when I'm there for 3 days, it reminds me, just take a little bit, like just breathe. It's okay to like walk in the vendor hall for a little bit. You don't have to go like from event to event. And so it really allowed me to get a better idea of everything that was happening at the weekend because it's so hard not to feel rushed. And
absolutely. And it doesn't even matter if it's a 2-day event or a 5-day event. The more you go to conventions, the more you realize there's just no way you can get to every single panel. There's no way you can meet everyone. Even like regardless, we're talking to celebrities, so you're talking to even your own friends. I mean, by now, let's, for a moment just to mention Vegas. I mean, how many people do we know that are mutual friends that go to STLV almost every year? Do you actually get to say hello to everyone when you go there in August? No, it's you go through the crowd, you say 100 hellos, and that's probably the extent of it because it's just so much stuff happening all the time. So yeah, just as a general kind of starting point, a lot of conventions, kind of everything starts when you get into the convention center. And a lot of this was mentioned in the last year's episode about WonderCon. But I'm just curious, generally, like in your experience, is it a comfortable space in the sense of, like navigating, orienting yourself? Because sometimes you do feel rushed because you can't actually find your way in physical space.
Mm-hmm. I think I was a lot more stressed out last year because I had no experience being in the Anaheim Convention Center and I didn't know where all the rooms were. And I really didn't know as a first year WonderCon goer last year what to really expect because I knew it was hosted by San Diego Comic-Con, but I didn't really know kind of the scale of it all. But they have a really nice program booklet that has everything set out and that has like not just the schedule for all 3 days, but it also like has little highlights of you might be interested in going to this, or if you like this franchise, you might like going to this. And there's a bunch of people around that you can always ask questions. There's multiple like booths that they have for customer service, which is great. So I honestly, it feels good. It does feel good.
Oh, do they have, besides the printed booklet, do they actually use some sort of scheduling app or something like that? Because I know a lot of Comic-Cons now specifically hire someone to make them an actual, like a schedule app or programming, something that's available. You can just carry it, with you on your iPhone or, smartphone in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they actually, through the WonderCon website, they had like all of the stuff listed and all you have to do is kind of like, you just put in your information, like you sign up for an account essentially, and then you can pick the events that you want to go to and your phone will actually remind you. It'll be like, you have this in however long. Yeah.
Excellent. So since you're local, obviously you don't have to care about the hotel. I'm assuming you just, or do you drive in every day, or did you actually get the hotel? Just since I'm not local, I don't know where you are in relation specifically to the the location of the convention.
Yeah, no problem. So the WonderCon is in Anaheim and I'm actually located in Oceanside. So it's about an hour and 20 minutes south. I'm closer to San Diego. So okay. I actually did drive. On the Friday that I went, I actually took transit. So I took the Amtrak up and then I took the Amtrak back, which was a little bit more expensive than I wanted it to be. But I just didn't really want to worry about parking my car and I was by myself. So I was like, I don't really want to like use all the gas just for me. So then on Saturday and on Sunday, I came with my husband and we drove up and drove back. But I almost wished, even though we are like within driving distance, that we would have gotten the hotel, because it's a lot of time taken out of your day to drive there and drive back. And especially driving back, which is kind of around that, we left kind of around that 7 p.m. time on Saturday, which traffic wasn't too bad. But coming back on Sunday, we came at like 5:30 we were heading home, and that's right in the middle of rush hour. So that was a nightmare. It took us like 3 hours to get back. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, so Aly, tell me, like, I heard, you mentioned about going to meeting the people. Like, that's one of the biggest draws for me for Star Trek Las Vegas, is like seeing the people year after year. So, like, do you get that kind of vibe at WonderCon? Like, are there people you met there that you're keeping in touch with now that you didn't know before?
Yeah, I actually met up. This was my first time officially meeting up with the LA OA team.
Oh, yeah.
I had seen through social media, but I'm kind of closer to San Diego, so I was never like officially a part of them. But I connected with a few of them, and anyone that I saw that was wearing any Star Trek cosplay, I was like, hey, how are you? And there were a few people actually through social media that I posted something about, hey, I'm going to be at WonderCon this weekend. And a few people actually were like, oh my gosh, you're the 23-year-old Trekkie. And here's me. Like, oh my goodness. Hi.
Fantastic. This is fun. Yeah, because I saw quite a few people posting. I'm like, oh my goodness, they should have like an official get together. And then I saw a large picture that I forget who posted it that said an LA team meetup photo, and there's like 20 or 30 people. I'm like, okay, about 30 of these people I actually know in person. Isn't this just absolutely wonderful?
Yeah, I'm a honorary member of the LAOA team.
Yes.
Yeah.
I used to travel quite a bit, and I went a couple times, met up with Yesenia.
Yes.
Took me around. So it was I wish we had that everywhere I went, but they really know what they're doing over there. That and then the New York.
And New York, I was about to say, Jesse, you definitely covered on either one of the coasts.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, last year actually we had a picture as well last year that they took, and it was only like about 10 of us last year, and I had no idea what was going on, because this is like, mind me, like the WonderCon last year was my first time there, so it was a little bit more overwhelming because I didn't really know what to expect. But when they took the picture, the day they were taking it, I was cosplaying as Ensign Ro. So literally someone picked me out and was like, get over here for this picture because you're in Star Trek cosplay. And I was like, okay. And so they like kind of dragged me over. But this year we were prepared for it. We were good.
Hey, so Aly, what's so conventions, cosplay, what do you like do you change it up? Is there a favorite cosplay you do when you go to conventions, or what's your mindset there?
That's a good question. Honestly, I consider myself very much a beginner going into cosplay. I still have a lot to learn, and it's just, for me, it's kind of fun because cosplay is not just about, making the costumes and being proud of that. Or, there's no shame in buying costumes either. I hate that there's kind of this like double-edged sword where people get mad at you if you like either order a costume or have a seamstress do it. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I like to cosplay characters that were very like important to me. So for example, the reason I cosplay Ensign Ro is because I love her fiery personality. Yeah. And I love just that like command that she brings to a scene. So that's like something that always inspired me growing up about her. So this past weekend at WonderCon on Friday, I cosplayed as just a normal TOS red scant. It was no person in particular, but just I wore my red scant. And I survived the weekend also wearing red, which I was very proud of.
There you go.
On Saturday, I went as the Cage Era #1, which was a cosplay I'd also worn at Star Trek Las Vegas this last year. And I actually found a Captain Pike, like a Cage Era Captain Pike, to go with my #1. So that was awesome.
Oh my God. I bet the Pikes are extremely popular at the conventions right now. As a cosplay, yes.
Yeah, I have fun.
That is excellent. Just curious, did you guys get to actually hang out? The cosplayers or specifically LA away team members after? you mentioned that you actually drove back, but did you guys actually have time to just sit down, chat, I don't know, have lunch together? Or is it mostly was part of the cosplaying and then maybe seeing each other at the panels?
No, actually, the way I had scheduled out the things I wanted to go to, because I knew already that I wasn't going to have time to get to everything, and I had accepted that. And I didn't really want to be running either, because I mean, when you're so stressed out, you kind of lose that joy of actually being there at the convention. So I had scheduled out like times to have lunch where I like once with some of the LAOA team members, we went, there's a coffee shop that was inside the convention center, and we just went and had a coffee and sat and talked for a little bit. And we did see a lot of each other at the panels. So kind of like before the panels would start, we would all sit together and kind of chat about stuff. But I know after the convention was done that some of the LAOA team members went out to dinner, and because I had to drive back, I couldn't stay, but I knew that happened.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's the best part about this.
And so let me ask you, panels, how easy is it to get in? Like, you know, I hear Comic-Con, I always hear about the lines, like the dreaded lines to get into panels.
The one thing that I'll say about the panels at WonderCon is there was not as much Star Trek programming as I would have liked. I feel like there was more Star Trek programming last year, but I feel like that was also in tandem with the fact that season 2 of Discovery was coming out, so they were marketing it different at that time versus, you know, we're already coming up to the season finale of Discovery now. So I think it was probably just because of the timing. So the one Star Trek event that was there's different sizes of rooms when you go to panels. So it's kind of, I'm sure that they guess how many people are going to want to come to that certain panel. So there's rooms that sit maybe 50, and then there's rooms that sit 100, and then there's rooms that sit like 700. So there was one panel that was they call it the North building, which is where all the big panels happen. So the one panel that was there was the Star Trek Discovery visual effects panel.
I heard about that one.
Yeah, but all the other ones, kind of like the Disco Nights with Chase Masterson, they did. And I mean, I'm sure we'll kind of go through the individual panels a little bit more later, but those were kind of in the smaller rooms that sat maybe 50 to 100.
Do they have some sort of like an equivalent of like a main theater, or is it just, you know, little rooms, medium rooms, larger rooms, but there is no like just one giant place for like a premium event or something?
That would probably be what I was saying about the North building, because they have like 200, they call it like the North building rooms, and there's 2 of them, and they both sit about 700 people, and there's like surround sound in the room and all that stuff. So those are the 2 largest rooms in the North building, but all the other stuff was in the main Anaheim Convention Hall, which were like the smaller rooms.
So was there anything kind of like known that, okay, this is going to be the event where people really do need to line up ahead of time? Not specifically for track, but just generally any kind of event that was probably more popular for this particular convention, because that's exactly what Jesse was bringing up. You know, very often that's, you know, main panels in well, they call them main stage in Javits Center for New York Comic Con. People literally sign up in the morning once the door opens. If you come in the afternoon, chances are there's actually no room left anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say probably the biggest thing that was happening in the North building would have been there was a Dark Phoenix panel on Friday for the new movie, if you're into X-Men.
Yep.
And then I believe there was also, I think it was in the North building, it was like a Shazam preview-ish thing, but that you had to like get chosen for. It was like a special thing you had to sign up for. And if you didn't get picked, you couldn't go. You had like wristbands and stuff. There's things that are exclusives, which kind of, I mean, I understand why they do that, because for something very popular, it's hard to fit everyone in the room, and then things get crazy. And that's why sometimes going the route of, hey, we're going to choose however many ticket holders, and you might get picked for that. But then it's also like, man, I wish I could have gone to that.
Yeah, I hear you. So speaking of panels, I kind of, it's actually, as of this recording, they still have the schedule on. They haven't updated the site for the next event yet, for the next year yet. So I looked through, I kind of did a little search, Star Trek, and see what pops up. And I see that pretty much throughout the entire weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there are panels that are specific for track. Like you said, there aren't that many of them. But there are also several that generally like genre related to Star Trek, which had speakers or hosts who were part of, they were either writers or they were producers or something else that did something Star Trek related in their career. But the ones that were specific to Star Trek, which ones did you actually manage to get into?
Okay, so on Friday they did Disco Nights with Chase Masterson.
Isn't she wonderful? I
Yes.
so hope that Creation will have her hosting more panels, which would like they did last year, because that was probably one of the highlights. I'm like, great, we're finally getting other hosts that are doing fantastic jobs.
Yeah, she does an awesome job. And so Disco Nights is a podcast about Discovery that Chase Masterson does with a few guests. And so they actually recorded it live for the for her podcast. I haven't had a chance to listen to it, but I was gonna ask a question, but I didn't get chosen, so I was like, maybe I can show up on the recording, but I didn't get there. And then also on Friday, IDW did a Star Trek Inside the Writers' Room panel for their new Star Trek Year 5 series of comics that they're doing. So I got a chance to go to that, which was really fun. On Saturday, the Inglorious Treksperts did a panel about Star Trek 5, about the Final Frontier, which I got a chance to go to. That was actually, I was really worried I was going to be late for that one, but I ended up making it.
If I'm remembering correctly, that's Mark Altman and Ed Gross, right?
Yes.
For those who are not aware, that's the people who did the wonderful 50th anniversary, the 2 volumes books, the basically oral history of Star Trek, which I highly recommend. Just excellent books. And that's the podcast that they do, Inglorious Treksperts.
That was a really fun one. And then also on Saturday they had the one that I mentioned earlier, which was the Star Trek Discovery Inside the Visual Effects, which was in the one of the large panel rooms. I was kind of it was interesting though, because I was expecting a lot more people. It was in this room that sat, I don't know, probably 600 700 people, and it was not very full. And I was it was strange to me, because last year when they had the Star Trek Discovery panel with that Mary Chieffo moderated, the room was full, like absolutely full. And I managed to get a seat in the front row, but this year I was expecting something around the same. But I don't know, maybe if it was because of it was about the visual effects. So it was more like behind the scenes versus, Sonequa Martin Green isn't sitting up there, or Shazad isn't sitting up there. So maybe that was part of it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's still, like you said, it's a little bit strange. I mean, considering that, visual effects are extraordinary. I mean, I don't know if that's a word strong enough for what we're seeing in Discovery. And it does look like that was supposed to be the Trek featured panel, because it was covered by both the official StarTrek.com staff and by Trek Movie, I believe, did a coverage of it. So it's a bit strange. Yeah, it's a bit strange that.
Who hosted that panel? Was it Neville Page or somebody?
Neville was supposed to be on the panel, but I believe he had a conflict, something that came up that he wasn't able to be there.
Yeah, according to they actually have the StarTrek.com's report on it. It was the executive producer and the director, Alatunde Hasanmi, Jason Zimmerman, who's the supervisor, Ante Dekovic, who's another supervisor, and the pre-visualization supervisor, Pavelski. So there were 4 people who were talking about pretty much everything. I mean, I read both reports on it. It sounded like this was a fascinating thing, especially if you're interested in what's going on behind the scenes, I suppose. So yeah, like I said, it's a little bit strange that it didn't get the attention it certainly deserves.
Yeah. And then after that on Saturday, I did not get a chance to go to. I know Michelle Specht from Star Trek Continues did a panel called Geek Fest's Women in Sci-Fi.
Yeah.
And I actually had seen that panel at the LA Comic-Con in October. So I chose to go to something different because I had seen it was a panel with almost everyone exactly the same with the same theme. So not that I would not love to see Michelle Specht again, because she's amazing, but
it's fun.
Yes, very much so. And then I ended the day on Saturday with the Star Trek SoCal Podcasters panel, which was super fun.
That's Larry's that's Larry's panel, right?
Yes, Larry Nemechek. Yeah, that was awesome. Actually, the first time I ever met Larry Nemechek was last year at WonderCon at the SoCal Podcasters panel.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, it was so interesting because like at that time I mean I was still doing Star Trek stuff on social media, but I definitely wasn't as active as I am now. So I had just like taken a few pictures with my phone and all that, and I had posted it and like, oh, I had this Star Trek panel thing on Twitter, and like Larry Nemechek, like he DM'd me on Twitter, and I was like, what is this? This is crazy. He was on this panel that I went to, and I was like freaking out. And he was just like, hey, do you have any more pictures or anything? And now, I mean, I talk to Larry all the time, and like, he's such a great guy. So it's just kind of like a fun story.
Yeah, Larry's I lived in Oklahoma for like 15 years, and Larry was like he's from Oklahoma, from near where I was, and he's like the hometown hero kind of thing. So at the local convention, he's just like a standing guest, they never have to even invite him because he's our shining star. It's fun, and he's a fun guy. It's fun to meet him in Vegas because he's one of the few there's a few that are like really personable and they don't get, it's not in their head that they're popular, and Larry's kind of one of them. I really enjoy talking to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely there's like a few times where he and I have like messaged a little bit because he knows that I'm here in California. And at first it kind of felt surreal because it was like, wow, like someone that's actually really like prominent in the Star Trek community is like talking to me. Like I'm just this little person, but
Yeah.
Larry is
Larry is a fellow fan. That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Did you get to go to any panels that actually have nothing to do with Star Trek? Because, just to get sort of a fuller experience of a Comic-Con.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually on Sunday, I only went to programming that was focused on comics because I brought my husband on Saturday and on Sunday. And so on Saturday, I was literally running around at all this Star Trek stuff. So I had agreed with him that on Sunday, I would go to the panels that he wanted to go to. So he's really into comics, like DC Comics. So we went to a few spotlights on Greg Capullo, who's an artist who does like The Batman Who Laughs, and then Tom King, who's currently writing Heroes in Crisis, if any of you guys follow comics. And then we also waited. There's a DC booth in the vendor room, and my husband had these artists and authors. They actually signed his comics that he had brought.
Oh, that's brilliant.
That they had been a part of, which was really cool. We had to wait in line for a while, but it was definitely worth it.
That's fantastic. Were there any specific guests? I mean, I know usually Comic-Cons guests get their own tables, and they're not necessarily are part of panels, but you can still stop by a table, and if it's not too crazy, actually chat with them, which I think it's a kind of a rarity at a very large Comic-Con. But were there anyone like that at this particular con, or was it just purely friends and panels, and that's it for you?
Well, I know that they had a specific area that they were doing like autographs. I didn't really make my way over there because I was trying not to spend too much money. If I knew I would just like my wallet would be empty if I went over there. But actually Nichelle Nichols was at a vendor booth and she was signing and taking pictures with people. So a lot of people were really excited about that. I actually got Nichelle's signature last year because I wasn't really sure. This is kind of her farewell tour. So I wasn't sure last year if she was going to be at another convention that I was going to be at this year. So I was like, I'm going to get it taken care of. So I did that last year. But I had a few people that saw that I was in a Star Trek costume throughout the weekend, and they're like, oh, Nichelle Nichols is here. Did you get her signature yet? And I was like, I got it last year, but thanks. Because I mean, I love that because sometimes like just seeing that I'm in that Star Trek stuff and they're like, oh, I want to share this with you because if you don't know about it, you should, you know?
Just generally speaking, I mean, it's fantastic when we actually meet up with people that we're friends with from other conventions or from online community. just generally speaking of the crowd at WonderCon, just how track friendly it is. And by that I mean, do you actually see it's like, okay, oh great, there's people wearing TNG panels, right? Oh, sorry, panels, TNG costumes right over there, around the corner, or is it, you actually do have that sort of like presence in terms of seeing stuff in like the vendor hall, actual collectibles that are specifically track being sold. So that's what I mean by track friendly. How track friendly is WonderCon?
It is truck friendly, yes, but I feel like it was more truck friendly last year. Also, back to the whole situation of timing. I think it's really all connected with especially how CBS is kind of marketing Star Trek Discovery right now.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a lot of really fun Star Trek cosplayers. So I saw a Cisco and a Guinan that were great. And like I said, throughout the weekend, I just like anyone in Star Trek cosplay, whether LA away team or not, I was like, oh, wait, hold on, let me talk to you. So I was pretty much chasing people around all weekend. And I did my favorite cosplay, actually, I saw on Saturday, and it was a mashup. The best way I would describe it is the Bat Borg. So it was like a Batman suit with Borg attachments. And that, just like the creativity of that is insane. I was like, I love the mashups that people do, or like when people add steampunk to stuff. I'm like, how do you guys think of that? Man, I'm
also wondering, I mean, aside from actually coming up with something as crazy as this, as creative as this, I mean, I'm assuming that that's something a person probably worked up themselves, how to create a costume and connect it all organically. That blows my mind.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Most of the time that I'm at a convention, I kind of just walk around in awe of these people that create these incredible costumes, whether they're Star Trek or not, because you can tell just the amount of work and effort that's been put into some of this stuff, especially like there's a lot of people that do like mech. So they have like actual functioning mechanics to their costumes, whether they're doing like Halo, like cosplaying Halo suits or anything like that. I'm like, man, the amount of detail that you had to put into that is incredible. I can't like even fathom how long you would have had to work on that.
Yeah, that's my favorite part about Comic-Cons. I have to admit that during Comic-Cons, I rarely meet as many fans that I already friends with, simply by virtue of the size of the event. I mean, if I bump into like two people, that's great success. I actually met two people that I'm friends with, but it's that exploring the vendor hall. That's one. I mean, I have to admit, New York Comic Con for the most part is actually a shopping expo. I mean, more than anything else. But watching people just stand like in the middle of an aisle. Do not stand in the middle of the aisle. Stand to the side. But standing somewhere in the aisle and just watching the people is the most amazing experience the Comic-Con can bring, because yes, it's this explosion of imagination and creativity. It's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. I the one thing that I think is really the coolest part is, so you'll sometimes see at certain conventions, like at the LA Comic-Con, they had it was like Southern California robotics team or something like that. And they had built like functional like R2-D2 and BB-8 from Star Wars. Wow. And it's so fun when you see that what someone's job is, actually they channel into their fandom that they love. So their job is to do mechanics and robotics, but through that they were able to express and the thing that they take joy in watching, which was Star Wars, or I mean Star Trek. Obviously, like the Bat Borg that I saw, he had a great appreciation of Star Trek and was able to channel that through his creativity. Yeah.
To kind of wrap up the whole panel thing, just generally, was there anything? I mean, Comic-Cons tend to be, obviously, you have this mishmash of all these different genres that are not actually necessarily the comic part of a Comic-Con. But was there anything not pop culture, so to speak? And by that, I mean, like a lot of events these days try to include something that is either specifically children directed or sciences. Sort of like very specific things that are not usually, pops into your head when you're like, I'm going to a convention and I'm going to go to a panel about, I don't know, Jupiter, or somebody about talking about.
Yeah, there's what Comic-Cons, what I get is like, at least they had comics, but Comic-Cons in general, like they're starting to become, it's been a trend, right? There's not as many
Yeah.
comics as there are.
Yeah, which is, it's like if you notice, comics usually get their own area, and then everything else kind of spreads out into this giant pop culture extravaganza. But especially, like you said, there's been a trend. I know Denver Comic Con, for instance, is very much into that. I found that a convention that I'm going to be trying for the first time this year, Awesome Con in DC, they have this very specific direction where you're going to have science panels. You know, it's not necessarily like the science of Batman or science of Star Trek. No. It's going to be science as in real science. And they're going to be talking about, you know, the moon landing or the Mars rovers or something like that. So was there something like that at WonderCon, or they actually didn't have any specialties like this?
It's actually interesting that you mentioned the Mars rovers. So there was this one panel that I had on my schedule that I was planning to get to, but it was on Friday night and I had a train to catch, and I was worried I was going to miss it. And then I would have been stuck there, which wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world. But so there was a panel, it was called No Tow Trucks Beyond Mars. And it was about, you know, with the Mars rovers, how they would go about troubleshooting when there were problems with with the rovers. So I wish I would have had a chance to go to that, because I love that connection, because it still has, I mean, it's still very relevant to a convention, because this is like practical mechanics.
Yeah.
So I wish I would have had a chance to go to that, but I did have a chance to go to, it was a panel about making comics in the classroom, kind of like multiple literacy learning. It was a panel about that, about how utilizing comics or encouraging kids to express themselves through either drawing or writing comics, how that can affect learning with young children, which was really cool. I only had a chance to catch about the last 15 minutes of it, but it was so cool to think about. I mean, some people say, well, you know, comics are for little kids, right? Like it's not a big deal. But also by having kids do that fosters their learning, or can foster their learning better, because children learn in different ways and express themselves in different ways. So that was a really interesting panel.
That's great. I love that something like this happens, that we're not just stuck with this giant monsters of conventions with crowds and nothing else. I mean, it's wonderful when the organizers actually put, you know, a lot of thought in what kind of programming is at the event.
Mm-hmm.
I'm speaking of, like, we started talking about vendors and artists, Aly. Was there any vendors that we're familiar with from specifically Star Trek community, or just generally, was there anything sort of like, okay, this looks like it's a new item or something that's out there right now?
Mm-hmm. There were a lot of booths that had Eagle Moss ships, but not a specific Eagle Moss booth. There was also a lot of, like art. So there were a lot of prints. There was one that I was so close to getting, but it was like $90, and I wasn't ready to dish out $90 for a print. I mean, that's not to say, I value so much the work of artists, and I know that, like, I'm not saying that the print was not worth $90, because it was. I wasn't ready to spend it yet.
What was the print? I have to know.
It was kind of an interlay where it was a vertical print, and it was the original Enterprise that was like facing upward, and then it had like I'm trying to like explain this in the best way, because I am not art inclined. So I'm sorry to anyone that is, because I'm going to like butcher this. So it was then the TOS crew, and it looked like they were like beaming, like, and it was like in front of the Enterprise, which was like, I don't know. I wish I would have taken a picture of it, but it was incredible. And I was so close to getting it, but I was like,
Yeah, you have to protect yourself in that vendor's room.
Yes.
Yeah. At STLV, I was just like, I'm going to buy this, and I'm going to buy this, and I'm going to buy this. And then the weekend was over, and I'm like, I'm broke.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same way.
Yeah. There was a lot more, I think. I don't know if maybe it was because there was more programming that was going in that way, but there was a lot of anime. And I know that they do a specific anime convention. It's like Anime Los Angeles or something. So there was a lot of that. But other than that, like I said, there really wasn't as much Star Trek as I would have liked. But like I said, Nichelle was there, and they were kind of selling like little tribbles and stuff at that booth. And I just wished there would have been a little bit more.
Yeah, well, you never know. You know, that's one of the reasons I always, even though I don't always succeed in doing that, but I do always try to kind of like, due diligence, just try to cover as many aisles and see what's out there. There was one event I was in, which I cannot remember what it was now. I am sorry. But for some reason, it had an unbelievable amount of Japanese plush toys. And I don't even know is it particular cartoons? Is it just generic plush? But it was like literally you could dive into those aisles and it was all nice and plushy and cute and adorable and fluffy. Not much track either, unfortunately. But yeah, you never know what's going to pop up.
It's also interesting I'm glad that we decided to record this episode, because even though there was a shore leave for last year's WonderCon, the conventions are always changing and they're always evolving based on what's happening in comics or pop culture that year. So even though like you could get a wrap up from last year, it's going to be different this year. Not entirely, because it's the same place and a lot of the vendors are still the same, but even when I went to STLV this last year, I had listened to the Tricorder Transmissions podcast about their STLV 101, because last year was my favorite, or it was my first time, and I was going by myself. So I was like, this is really overwhelming. But even from listening to that, I got a lot of tips that I really needed, but then was able to experience completely new things that hadn't been mentioned in the STLV 101 episode.
Yeah, we need to, Marina, we may need to revamp that. Marina and I were part of that whole series.
That's right. Yeah, we did parts 2 and 3 together, I believe. But absolutely, I mean, things change. I mean, conventions grow and shrink, although right now pretty much every event that I'm aware of is growing. Obviously you have to update it based on what's going on in the fandom, but overall, I'm from all of this, I'm going to take that you enjoyed WonderCon, so will you go again?
I hope I will get back here. Actually, I am allowed to say this. I am moving to Japan in this summer. So I am kind of going way across the world, but I'm sure that there will be conventions there as well that I can share with you guys.
I am sure.
Fantastic. Yes, we're going to have our Tricorder Tribe is kind of getting spread out throughout the world.
But I hope so. I hope I'll get back for it. And that's kind of what made me sad. I won't be able to attend Star Trek Las Vegas this year, partly because of that. So I was like really bummed out about that, but then I'm hoping to make it back. I'll come back.
Perhaps next year. I mean, next year is yet another big anniversary, which is sort of like what we seem to be experiencing as part of the Star Trek fandom, specifically over the last, I don't know how many years. Like, it seems like there was an anniversary of something every single day. So let's start to wrap it up. Just generally your experience. So was there anything unexpected that the convention had made more enjoyable? Or is it more like, okay, this was comfortably familiar, and that was great? Just the overall kind of like the vibe from the convention, the overall kind of, let's put a dot all the I's before we finish this episode.
I felt very much at home because I had been there last year, so I kind of had the lay of the land and I knew what was going on. But I really took more time this year to kind of appreciate it, because last year I literally scheduled myself out like insane. It was like, I'm going to go to this panel and I'm going to leave halfway through this panel to go to this one and then do this, and it was like all day of that. And you don't realize when you are at a convention, I mean, you're there for 12 hours, 14 hours, however long you're there. And that's, if you schedule yourself out so busy, you're always on the move, you're always going. And I try to, when I'm at a panel, I try to do like a little live tweet or something about it, so the people that aren't there can kind of experience a little bit about what it would be like or what's talked about. So imagine doing that and being on your feet and running around and trying to get to this room. Try doing that for 14 hours. It sometimes can be so overwhelming and you don't realize, like, I didn't eat lunch, or I haven't drank any water today. And that's not okay in any way.
That's one of the dangers of the convention.
Yes.
Do not do that.
So I really, I took time and I said, hey, I'm here for 3 days. I'm really going to appreciate it. So I talked to a lot more people than I did last year. And I brought little business cards with me that, I mean, not just had my information, but Tricorder's information. I was like, hey, like, you should check this out. I talk on this network. And a lot of people were just like, they saw I was wearing Star Trek, and instead of being like, oh, thanks, and like running to my next panel, I was like, hey, like, why do you like Star Trek? What did you start watching with Star Trek? And you really get to make these connections more so than like, I am running around with a chicken with its head cut off. Like,
Yeah.
you can actually experience it.
So besides, taking your time and spreading yourself out evenly, so to speak, any recommendations for those who are thinking about attending WonderCon for the first time?
Yeah.
Yes,
What would you say to Marina and Jesse?
Yes, yes, please.
I would say make sure to not just, because you can have the schedule on your phone, but I also had like a little notebook that I had written stuff down in, and I also made a point to kind of like walk around a little bit around the panels that I was going to, because usually when you go through the schedule of all the things that are happening, like for example, I was just like Star Trek, Star Trek, Star Trek, here's the ones I'm going to because they have something to do with Star Trek. But I actually dropped in, didn't even mean to go to this panel, and it ended up being my favorite panel of the entire weekend. It was called Forging Careers in Fandom. And it was just the room was near one of the panels that I was just coming out of. And I had a little bit of time, so I sat in on it. And you can have some of the most amazing experiences. And that I would have never thought to go to that, but I just happened to be there at the right time. So just don't box yourself in. Try to go to new things, at least one. That's why I was like, I don't have to like go crazy all weekend, but like I'm going to try going to a different panel that I probably wouldn't have gone to. I also recommend make sure to be there early. It wasn't super crazy this year. I actually think there were less people than there were last year, which is, don't quote me on that because I don't know for sure what the totals were. And maybe it was because I was in a panel during the really busy time or something like that. So make sure to get there early. Bring food because they had food trucks that were outside, kind of that you could get lunch there and stuff. But one of the food trucks that I went to, like for my husband and I to just have lunch, it was like $45.
Wow.
Wow.
It was bizarre. So, or bring snacks.
Save 2 lunches and buy yourself a print.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, man, I'm spending all my money on food. I'm not going to be able to buy anything. So, and also just even talk to people, talk to someone you wouldn't think to talk to. Because there was this one person who I was plugging my phone in. I had a battery pack, but it had ran out because I was on my phone so much. I don't know what that says about me, but so I was plugging my phone in and I just like randomly spurred up a conversation with this guy and we started talking about podcasting, and he also did a podcast and he gave me some really good advice. So it's just fun. All these people that are there to enjoy not always the same thing as you, but are there to celebrate this thing, this franchise or this cartoon or this anime that they love. So just it's just so cool to be in that space with all those people that are there celebrating that thing that they love.
Yeah.
Very good.
All right. Any last minutes about just generally this experience or anything else? I mean, this was a wonderful thing to know, and again, it feels like there's just this, eternal. Well, you would need probably an eternity to try all these events. But there's so many conventions getting out there that are just brilliant. I mean, what a wonderful time to be a pop culture fan in general, and Trek especially right now.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for sharing, because like I definitely want to make it to the West Coast, but like my biggest fear, my first convention was Star Trek Las Vegas, so I got spoiled because I didn't have to wait. I didn't have to wait in lines, and it was my people. So I always worry about going to other more conventions with bigger genre sets, because like it's like the nightmare that you hear people say, like I moved to Atlanta and I've got friends asking me if I want to go to
Dragon Con.
Dragon Con, and I'm like, it's like 8 city blocks. There's no way I'm going.
The thing is that it's like let's see, how many years have I been doing Trek before I actually tried something else? Probably 3 or 4. It kind of gets to the point when you want to try something new and see like what else is out there, and then it's kind of like you're hearing all these horror stories about this and that. But if you really want to go, and you do find a way to enjoy yourself,
Yeah,
even
I
if you
think
do end up standing in line somewhere or you end up missing something, you find a different way of dealing it rather than when you have a franchise-specific convention set up the way that, let's say, SLV is set up. But
Yeah,
there's just
yeah.
stuff happening all the time. Like take this weekend as we're recording this. There's actually two great conventions happening in Pennsylvania right now. One in the eastern part, the Greater Philadelphia Comic Con, and one in the western Steel City Comic Con in Pittsburgh. I almost wish I had like additional copies of me or something so that I could actually go out there and check it out. The guest lists are brilliant, and I'm sure the panels are wonderful, and plenty of familiar faces are attending. Like I can have dinners with fellow fans, and we can just sit down and chat
yeah,
track.
yeah, it's so much
Yeah.
fun.
So just to kind of start and finish up here, something that is a bit of like a news event, and it is something that Aly did bring up, that Nichelle Nichols is currently in the middle of a farewell tour, if you will. There has been an announcement not so long ago that she will have a farewell convention. So like the last time Hailing Frequencies open, that's going to be in May of next year. That's May 1st through May 3rd in 2020. It's in Burbank, California, and they already started announcing guests, and it looks like it's going to be a nice goodbye, basically. So it's just something to be aware of for, well, first of all, folks who are local, and then definitely any other Star Trek fan who would like to attend an event like this. Actually, I'm trying to remember if anybody else from the original series actually had sort of like, well, besides Leonard Nimoy, he also had several conventions in a row that was sort of like a goodbye convention tour. Other than that, I guess that's really it for me for this episode.
Yep, I think again, Aly, thank you so much for joining us, and I just you made me want to go now.
Good, I'm glad.
I know.
Aly, where can people find you on social media these days?
Sure thing. I can be found on Twitter. My handle is @TTrekkie. I can also be found by that handle on Instagram, and you can find my Facebook page through that, or you can just type in the 23-year-old Trekkie. My website is ttrekkie.wordpress.com, and if you ever want to send me an email, my email is the.the.ttrekkie@gmail.com.
All right, wonderful. And Jesse, where can people find you online?
On Facebook, obviously, and I'm there, and then I'm always there. And then I'm at Outrageous Okendo. That's OUTRAJESOKENDO on Twitter and Instagram.
All right, and I'm Marina Kravchuk, and you can find me on Facebook, my full name, or on Twitter at Dracorex, DRAKKOREX. And this was Shoreleaf, your Star Trek Convention Community Podcast. You can find us on Facebook under that name, or on Twitter at Shoreleaf. Thank you. Keep on tracking.
Keep on tracking. Live long and prosper.